I didn't see the puppy at first. I only saw the snow, the way it gathered in the seams of the town like salt, the way the streetlights turned the flakes into a pale, unending curtain. I had my scarf wrapped over my nose and my hands jammed into my coat pockets, and I was thinking about the burning kettle at home, about the way Lily's socks never matched, about Daniel's text saying he'd be late. Winter does that, shrinks your world, turns every errand into a tunnel you try to move through as fast as you can. I might have passed him if not for the sound he made. It wasn't a bark. Not even a whine. A brittle, little sound like frost shattering. He was wedged under the slanted lip of a bus stop bench, a scrap of a thing the color of wet leaves. Snow had packed against his ribs. His eyes didn't blink at first, they were just two dark beads in a face too small for its own bones. People kept their heads down, gliding past with the single-mindedness of winter commuters. I dropped to my knees so fast the cold knifed through my jeans. He trembled when I reached for him, but he didn't try to run. He had nowhere to go. "You poor thing," I whispered, and my breath rushed white over him. He smelled like old cardboard. I slid my hands beneath his belly, feeling the stick of dirt and the knobs of spine, and he sighed, actually sighed, like he'd been waiting to be picked up all along. "You're taking him?" a stranger asked, half incredulous and half relieved, shifting a grocery bag from one thick glove to the other. "I think I am," I said. "You think you are," he repeated, and shook his head, and then smiled a little at himself because maybe he understood that the words didn't matter. The thing had already happened. The puppy's heat was desperately small against my chest as I tucked him under my coat. I stood, and the snow fell a little slower. At home I warmed a towel in the dryer and dried him in front of the heater while the kettle hissed. He didn't bark. He watched me with that same wide, stunned stillness, like the apartment was a dream he might wake from. I poured water into a bowl and set it down, and then scrambled an egg for him, because that's what I remembered my grandmother doing for sick dogs. He ate so fast he coughed, and I touched his back and felt every vertebrae like beads on a string. "Lily's going to love you," I said, and the puppy's ears twitched at the name, at the hope that saturated it. He already looked better with the wet brushed out of him. The brown of his fur was warmer, a soft caramel with a darker stripe down his neck. There was a little notch out of one ear, like a bite taken from a cookie. We named him Scout that night, after Lily tumbled in from the neighbors, shedding snow and questions. Her cheeks flushed pink, and when she saw him she went very, very still, like him, like they were mirrors, and then she broke into a run that shook the apartment and dropped to the floor so hard her hair exploded in a halo. "His ours," she breathed. "His ours," I said, even though we had not asked the landlord and I was not sure how we'd do it. It didn't matter. The thing had already happened. That night, Scout slept curled under Lily's bed, his nose against the scuffed wood, his paws twitching. I woke once to the sound of him thudding softly into the baseboard as he chased something in his sleep. The apartment smelled like wet dog and toast, and when I closed my eyes again, I felt a warm, tired light rise up in me. Outside, the snow kept driving, but inside we had made a small, improbable island. Scout grew the way children do, quietly, shockingly, all at once. The bones of his face softened into a kind of perpetual open-mouthed grin. His paws, too big for him at first, found their size and purpose. He learned where the food was, where Lily liked to sit with her knees tucked under her hoodie, where the mail slot clacked and the way the sun crawled across the living room rug. He learned that Daniel whistled one long note before he came in, and that I always wiped my hands on the towel by the oven. He learned the word walk with a violent joy that sent him skittering across the tile. He learned that Lily's bed was high ground, that socks were contraband, that the pigeons on the fire escape were enemies beyond comprehension. He learned, too, about water. The first time I took him to the lake, it was almost spring. The ice had broken up into gray plates that drifted like forgotten dishes in a sink. The air had that raw, metallic taste of thaw. Scout stood at the edge and tilted his head, and the wind combed his ears back from his skull. When a wave licked the shore, he leapt backward, startled, then forward again, curious. He looked back at me and wagged, "This question? This?" "Not today," I said, and he turned back to watch the water with the solemnity of a student or a priest. At home, Daniel laughed. "My dad used to say dogs that watch water are deep thinkers," he said, passing a dish towel from one hand to the other while Lily tried to balance a grape on her nose. Or maybe he made that up because their old Labrador would stare at the river for hours. Maybe Scout's going to write a novel, Lily said, and the grape fell, and Scout snapped it out of the air like a magician. We moved that summer to a house that wasn't much bigger than the apartment but had a small yard and a sagging porch and, most importantly, an unimpeded view of the lake. The rent nearly killed me. The repairs nearly killed Daniel. The porch steps bowed like a tired back, and the fence leaned, and the paint came off in long melancholic ribbons. But the lake was there, a sheet of hammered metal on windy days and glass on others, and the sound of it at night pressed right up into our sleep. Lily learned the names of the birds that swung over it. Scout learned the time of the fishermen, the blue aluminum of their coolers, the thin silver flash of fish at dusk. He also learned Lily's steps. He came to know them so intimately that if she shifted her weight at night, just a whisper of motion, he would appear in the doorway, a pale phantom in the hall, head cocked. Here? When Lily was 7 and the lake was all the way open and the summer was a living thing that wrapped itself around our throats and wrists, we bought her a little yellow life vest with cartoon fish smiling on the front. She wore it like a badge, like an identity, like a promise. We set strict rules. The dock was for all of us together. The shore, the little pebbled crescent behind our house, was for her and Scout when we were at the water's edge with her. She could dangle her feet, collect skiprocks, sing to the minnows. But the dock? The dock was only when we were all there. Lily is not a disobeying child. She is bright and fast and sometimes scarily brave, but she listens. If she had been the sort of child who tested fences, I might have been more vigilant that day. If she had been the sort to run full speed at the world every minute, this would be a different story. But she is not. She is the child who comes to the doorframe and leans and asks if now is a good time. She is the child who moves slowly through summer when it is too hot, carrying a glass of lemonade with both hands and a straw between her teeth, sucking like a little camel. The day it happened, the air pressed down with the unkindness August saves for those who have to work. Daniel had gone into the city for a job site walkthrough. I stood at the kitchen sink cutting watermelon into crescents, the sweet red thick as velvet under the knife. The radio murmured with a baseball game. A fly tracked lazy loops over the bowl of tomatoes. I could see the lake through the window, that flat expanse of light, a few scumbled clouds reflected in it, the dock a little finger pointing into the brightness. Lily and Scout were in the yard. I knew this in the way you know where someone is because the house hums differently when they are not where they should be. There had been sidewalk chalk, earlier. There had been a rope, a sheet we were pretending was a sail. There had been a long debate about whether the cloud that looked like a dragon looked more like a whale. I had told Lily we would go down to the water together after lunch. I had told her I wanted to wait for the heat to tilt, for the sun to lose a little of its knife edge. She had nodded, and said okay, and dragged the chalk across the steps so hard it broke in two. I carried the bowl of watermelon to the table and felt the house lurch onto its quieter axis. You know how changes in a room can be so small and yet they are earthquakes? The radio's crowd noise sounded suddenly too far away, like it was coming from the bottom of a pool. The fly in its orbit drew a dark crescent through the air. Somewhere outside a gull laughed, and then stopped mid-laugh. "Scout!" I called, and then Lily. No sound. No pad of paws on the porch. No small voice answering. Just the lake, the lake, the lake, and the window like a square of glare. I moved before I knew I was moving. The screen door banged, and the yard whipped into view, the rope and the chalk and the overturned bucket. The gate was latched. The dock was not far, it never had been. I could see it perfectly through the thickets of purple loosestrife and the leaning fence, the wooden board sun-silvered and the 2 bolts Daniel had replaced and the blue milk crate at the end where you could sit and dangle your feet. And there was Scout, at the top of the path to the dock, his body a single taut line I had never seen before. He looked at me once, with a face I did not know he had, and then he went. He ran. It was not frenzy. It was velocity made meaningful. He streaked down the path, onto the dock, where he did not hesitate. He put 4 paws on that wooden finger and launched himself into the bright air. There are moments the world goes silent and huge, and everything you are folds into a needle. I didn't scream at first. I was running, and my breath burned, and the dock jumped under my feet like a living thing. I saw Lily then, little yellow vest, little yellow daisy of a girl, off the side of the dock and not far from the surface, except she wasn't at the surface, her face was in the water, and her hands were not right, and there was a lace of weeds around one ankle that held her like it wanted to keep her. Her hair floated like a dark cloud. Her legs kicked with the terrible, sluggish rhythm of panic and a dream. "Lily!" I screamed then, the sound shattering me, and the water took the rest of my breath. I dropped to my knees at the edge of the dock and reached, but she slid under, her foot caught, the water making her slippery as soap. I didn't think. I slid off the dock and into the cold shock of the lake and felt it take me, piece by piece, legs, waist, chest, heart. Scout arrived in that same second, not at the surface like a dog in a cartoon, but under and then up, like an arrow rises after it finds its mark. He surfaced beside her and went under again, and when he rose a second time, Lily's shoulder was between his teeth. Not hard. Not piercing. The exact right bite to hold her up. I grabbed her under the arms, and Scout kicked, and we surged as one shape toward the shallow. The lake slapped my mouth. The weeds tried to cradle my knees. I screamed again, and my voice broke, and we scraped bottom and I pulled her, and Scout never let go, not when her small hand clawed at his eye by mistake, not when she coughed lake into my face, not when the dock bumped my shoulder. He held until we were on our knees in the water, and then on our feet in the gravel, and then Lily was on the grass and I was on top of her and the world roared back in like a freight train. Her face was startlingly white with 2 angry streaks where the weeds had kissed her. Her lips were blue. Her eyes were open but wrong. I slapped her cheek, not hard, but hard enough to make the memory stick into me like a needle forever, and pushed on her sternum not the way you're supposed to, not with the textbook in my head but with the force of everything I am. She coughed then with a sound like tearing paper and water came out of her in a flood that drenched my knees and arms and washed pebbles away from my shins. She blinked, and color poured back into her face like someone opening a curtain. "Mom?" she croaked, and then "Scout?" He was there, already there, sitting so close that his chest touched her arm, trembling so hard his tag rattled. He licked the corner of her mouth with reverence. He tucked his head beneath her hand even as it shook and found him. "I'm here," I said. "Oh, baby, I'm here. You're okay. You're okay." I didn't know if it was true, but I needed it to be. I said it until I could breathe again. Later, after the ambulance, after the EMT with freckles checked Lily's pupils and smiled and told me they looked like perfect coins, after the neighbor who had seen us from his porch brought a towel and then another, after Daniel arrived with a face I had never seen before, the skin of it gray and then abruptly fierce, after Lily, wrapped like a burrito, fell asleep on the couch and we sat on the floor so we could put our hands on her ankle and foot just to feel her warmth. Later, when the house had unclenched, we gave Scout a steak from the freezer we had been saving for a better day. He didn't eat it right away. He sat, his paws together in an awkward prayer, and looked at us with confusion and something like embarrassment, as if he had been caught doing something private. "You saved her life," Daniel said, and his voice broke. He put his forehead against Scout's, and Scout shut his eyes and exhaled. Then he ate the steak, carefully, as if it might still listen to him. 4 days afterward, Lily stuck to Scout as if he were a second shadow. She pressed her cheek to his ribs as she read, making a little tent with her body and a paperback. She dropped bits of carrot into his mouth from high above and giggled at the soft clack of his teeth. When she woke from a nap, he woke too, his head rising instantly as if attached to her by a string. At night he slept in the doorway to her room and positioned himself so that if anyone were to come down the hall, they would have to step on him first. News travels the way it wants to. By the weekend, neighbors we barely knew were stopping by the fence to lean their forearms on the top beam and shake their heads and say, "That dog," the way you say "that mountain" or "that flood," with all built into the spaces between the words. Mrs. Bennett from 2 houses over brought a bag of liver treats and cried until she had to sit on the porch steps. The Johnson boy asked to take Scout's picture, and Scout, who has always tolerated attention without quite understanding it, sat with surprising dignity and looked into the lens. A reporter came. It felt ridiculous and also like a blessing, to tell the story to someone who hadn't been there, because in the telling it settled into a shape that didn't have to batter my ribs every minute. They wanted a shot down by the dock, and I agreed, though my knees went soft at the edge and my mouth dried and Scout trotted between Lily and the drop, anxiety flickering over him like fur in static. The reporter, a woman with tired eyes and an honest smile, asked Lily what she remembered. Lily thought for a moment in that deliberate way she has and then said, "I remember weeds, and it being quiet, and then it wasn't quiet. And Scout's nose. His nose was very, here." She pressed her hand to her own shoulder and grinned. Scout leaned against her leg so hard she had to put her hand on his head to balance. "Why were you on the dock?" the reporter asked gently, and I had braced for this, had prepared to cut in, had rehearsed not saying we have rules, we have had them forever, she is a good child, we are not careless. But Lily beat me to it. She said, honestly, "I thought it would be okay just to sit. I wanted to hear the fish." She said, "I'm sorry." And she looked at me, and I looked back at her, and something passed between us that was not forgiveness because there was nothing to forgive, but something like the idea of it, the shape of it in the air. The story went small viral, then quieted. Winter came back around, as it always does, relentless and erasing. We hung glittering paper snowflakes from the kitchen doorway and learned the names of stars from a book Lily checked out of the library. Scout watched the lake again, this time a lid of pewter hard enough to walk on if you were as foolish as the teenagers from the next road over. I forbade the ice with a voice that allowed no bargaining. Lily, who had learned something of the world's edges, didn't ask. On the anniversary of the day by the dock, Lily and I baked a cake for Scout, a lopsided construction of dog-safe ingredients that tasted, to humans, like sweet paper. We wrote his name on it in blobby peanut butter letters. We sang to him because Lily said he deserved a song. When we finished, he looked between us with that beautiful confusion again, like he thought he might be in trouble. "You're not in trouble," I told him. "You're never in trouble." He tilted his head. We laughed. He ate the cake faster than was ceremonially appropriate, and when crumbs clung to his chin he tried to lick them off, which did not improve matters. You might think that after such a story there would be nothing but golden light for the rest of our days, the narrative solved and the credits prepared to roll. But life is not a story, and also it is. Weeks after, Lily had a nightmare in which the water was dark and endless and something tugged her down, not weeds but a sadness with hands. She woke screaming. Scout woke too, and without instruction or comprehension he climbed onto the bed and draped his long body over her shins like a living blanket. She fell asleep with her fingers twisted in his collar, and in the morning she had a faint red mark on her cheek from pressing her face into his fur. It looked like a maple leaf. She liked it. The following spring, I walked down to the dock alone. The light was pale and new, the kind that makes you think of green even before anything is green. I sat at the end and let my feet dangle not into the water, it was still too cold, but above it. I did not cry, though there was a catch in my throat that lived there now, a new organ, maybe, a little knot that tied my past and present together whenever I smelled lake or heard a gull. Scout came after a few minutes, unhurried, took the spot beside me, and stared with me out at the open. "Do you remember?" I asked, because I talk to him as if he is a person, because sometimes it helps to say things to a creature who will not argue and will not comfort either but will do something better, be there. He sighed and lay down, his chin on his paws. His ear brushed my ankle. He has a notch in that ear, and when I see it, I think of cold bus stop benches and the way strangers look away from small suffering. I think of the terrible, holy duty we have to look toward it instead. I think of how some rescues are obvious and some look like ordinary days. I think about the way we are saved in increments, by small kindnesses and dumb luck and the stubborn stories we tell ourselves about being brave. Scout turned his head and pressed his nose into my calf. The lake made its old noise, the one that sounds like speech if you're tired enough or open enough. The wind came up, and the water furred, and somewhere behind us Lily laughed, a high clear sound like a string plucked. She was on the porch with a book and a glass of something cold and a pencil she held like a wand. She was alive. She was growing. She would move farther and farther from the dock that nearly took her. She would make rules for herself she would sometimes break and sometimes keep. She would have 100 small days and a few large ones. She would leave us someday, and also never leave. Scout would not live forever. I thought about this often, with the clarity that comes from gratitude so sharp it hurts. One day he would not sleep in her doorway, the hum he added to the house would vanish the way a refrigerator noise vanishes, noticeable only in its absence. One day his paws would stop drumming on the floor when he dreamed. One day the notch in his ear would be a memory I touched with my fingers as if memory were textured. One day I would sit at this dock alone and miss the weight of his head against my shin so much it would bend me. But not today. Today, the lake lifted its small shoulders. Today, Lily turned a page. Today, Scout breathed, steady as a metronome, and watched the water like a deep thinker, or like a dog, which is a better thing. When we go into town now, we sometimes pass the bus stop where I found him. The bench is still crooked. In winter, the snow still piles against the metal and glitters under the lights. Once, when Lily was 8, we stood there waiting for Daniel to return our car, and she noticed a paper cup tipped over near the curb, its little plastic lid at a sad angle. She picked up the cup and the lid and nudged them into the trash bin with her elbow, the way you do when you're trying not to touch something sticky. "What?" she said when I looked at her. "We're the kind of people who pick up things." We are. Or rather, we became them, on a night heavy with snow and a day heavy with fear and a summer full of ordinary afternoons braided with a miracle. We became them because a small shivering thing needed to be carried, and we were there, and we reached down, and he let himself be lifted. Scout is old enough now to have a few white hairs in his brown. He climbs the porch steps slowly sometimes, with a deliberateness that makes me want to go behind him, cupping his hips with my palms like you do with toddlers learning stairs. He still runs at the sight of the lake, though, in short, joyous bursts, and if Lily is near the water he positions himself like a sentinel, one paw forward, his head flicking between her and the place where the blue begins. He has developed a fascination with dragonflies. He snaps at them and then snorts as if offended by their insolence when they escape. On warm evenings, when the day loosens its grip, the three of us, 4, because Scout is not an accessory but a measure, walk down to the dock together. The boards are grey and dear to me. The bolts Daniel replaced flash in the last light. We sit with our feet above the water, and Lily tells us things about school that make me think of 100 docks she will stand on and dangle her feet but not jump, she will measure and leap, and sometimes she will fall, and sometimes the weeds will know her ankle. But she knows now what pulling feels like, the way someone's hands under your arms can be a rope. She knows that being saved can hurt and still be a gift. We don't bring the camera anymore. The story they filmed is theirs, this one is ours. The wind brings us the smell of someone else's grill, a sweet, meaty haze. The neighbor's dog, Charlie, who is afraid of everything, barks at a kayak. The lake changes color the way quiet changes when a laugh travels through it. Scout leans on Lily so hard she protests, and then loops an arm around his neck and leans back. "You owe me your life," she tells him sometimes, grinning. He blinks, then yawns, showing all his wet teeth, unconcerned by debts, fluent in a different economy. "No," I always say, because stories need their endings and we get to choose them. It's the other way around. It will always be the other way around. We rescued him once, in snow and panic and the smallness of a kitchen with a heater hissing, and he rescues us still, in large ways and small, by waking at Lily's smallest sound, by lifting his head when the world gets too loud, reminding us of a simpler attention, by staring at the water until we remember to do the same. He tugged my daughter out of the lake one terrible afternoon in August, yes. But he also tugs us back, every day, to the edge of what matters. He shows us how to watch, how to wait, how to move when the time comes without doubt or ceremony, how to hold gently and not let go. And at night sometimes, when the house has stacked itself into quiet and the lake has gone dark and the wind is at the windows like a question, I get up and stand in Lily's doorway. Scout is there, a folded brown shape against the pale hallway floor. He lifts his head, sees me, thumps his tail once. Lily breathes in that deep child way, a slow sea moving. The notch in Scout's ear is a shadow like a smile. "Thank you," I say, to him, to the lake, to the winter that brought him and the summer that didn't keep her, to the shape of the story that curved us back into ourselves. He yawns, trembles once into comfort, and lays his chin back on his paws. I go back to bed. The house releases its held breath. Outside, in the dark, The water says whatever it has always said, and we, in here, listen.